BP, which has accepted responsibility for the cleanup costs, is not the only company targeted for blame. Halliburton, which cemented the undersea well pipe just a day before the explosion, is also being sued by those injured from the spill. In one of those lawsuits, an injured technician alleges that the work was improperly executed and led to the fire and explosion. Federal and state officials are touring the region, listening to residents and soliciting their advice on how to cope with the oil slick. A federal compensation fund set up after the Exxon Valdez shipwreck is supposed to provide interim relief, but the area's congressman says it won't be enough to deal with an oil flow that has no end in sight.
You've got a fund in there that's got $1 billion in it to compensate people until the settlement with the oil company that's responsible. $1 billion if you've got Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and they've got people that are damaged, is not going for it all.
But the fishermen here are not talking yet about compensation.
I don't want a big settlement. I would prefer to get out there and work and help contain and clean up the spill and make my money. I don't want to sit back, and none of these guys do.
BP has offered to hire fishermen, but they must sign an agreement absolving the company of liability if they are hurt.
BP gives people faulty equipment. We know that. So they're looking for a prior indemnification before we let you use our equipment. If our equipment hurts you, you're not going to sue us. Well, you know, these guys don't have a great record in taking care of people's health and safety.
This wasn't just sheen. We were seeing heavy oil out there. This wasn't just tar balls. It shows you how quickly that oil showed up.
This video was shot by the local parish government in South Pass. When we tried to reach the beach, seen here and covered in oil, a boat of BP contractors with 2 Coast Guard officers on board told us to turn around under threat of arrest.
This is BP road, not ours.
We spoke to Coast Guard officials today. They say they're looking into it. Katie?
And Kelly, what has been the impact on wildlife so far?
Government officials say that 162 sea turtles have died, about half a dozen bottlenose dolphins have died. The sea turtles have not been thoroughly examined yet, but federal officials say this seems related to the oil spill, and they admit they have no idea what's happening in the deeper waters because they can't watch it.
On May 7, 2010, John Watson and pilot Tom Hutchins flew out over the Gulf of Mexico. Along the way, we saw small boats dragging buoys out to the islands to protect them from the oil sheen that was certainly coming our way. At 9 miles out, we began to smell the oil. At 11 miles out, we saw a visible sheen on top of the water. Heavy streaking was evident at about mile 15. Mile 26, we began to see solid oil on top of the water with a heavy sheen and numerous streaks at mile 34. Mile 87, ground zero. My first view of the site was one of tremendous impact. I'll never forget the scene. These are not small boats. While standing at a dock looking at them, they look like large ships. They're dwarfed in comparison to what I see on the horizon. Nothing but a red mass of floating goo that could have been prevented and should have been prevented. I was horrified when I looked and saw how many boats there were on the horizon that didn't seem to be doing anything at all that was effective. Going around in circles, small boats with booms on the back of them, sent out to gather up oil in what looked like teacups compared to the horizon. We counted 30 boats in the pictures, all floating around while this stuff was headed for shore. Nobody seemed to be able to do anything about it. For the first time in my environmental career, I find myself using the words hopeless. We can't stop this. There's no way to prevent this from hitting our shorelines. The best I think we can do is minimize the impact, learn from our mistakes, We have to have fuel, we have to have gasoline. The price we're paying now is far too expensive. Safety measures that could have prevented this were not in place. It's time for our government to step up to the plate and take responsibility for what's happening on the shores of our country. Several waterkeeper programs along the coast have already been impacted, and many more are expecting landfall. Along with other environmental groups up and down the coast, it should be mentioned that this is not only an environmental disaster, but a social disaster as well. Fishermen out of work, oyster shuckers, no work, people working the docks, all up and down the coast. People are canceling reservations. Fishing boats are not going out. The economic impact to this event will be incredible and felt for decades to come. No one knows if the fishing will ever recover. No one knows if the Gulf will ever heal from this. One thing for certain, we must learn from the mistakes that have been made here. This cannot happen again. The Gulf appears to be bleeding. Will we ever be able to stem the tide? Will we ever be able to put a stop to this? Will the Gulf ever heal? As far as you can see on the horizon now, there's these mats of this reddish pink sheen. It was easy to find our way back to shore. All we had to do was follow the red. There was a perfect line of it leading from the rig toward the shoreline. Here right off Ship Island and Horn Island, we found sheen behind the islands and in the sound. Preparations had been made, but will it be enough? Dolphin Island in Alabama, we saw sheen coming ashore at the far end of the island. That was on May the 7th. On May the 8th, they found tar balls.